Welcome to another episode of the 6Ps podcast. Today we're going to continue our focus on Trevor Noah's memoir, Born a Crime, and this episode will focus on writing your essays. Let's start with the basics. You will be writing a text response essay both on your SAC and on the exam, and we're looking for around 900 to 1200 words approximately, but again, no one's really counting these. You need to explore the implications of a specific question, and you want to showcase your knowledge of the text when you do this. This is some information from the 2024 exam report, which shows you the average marks when it came to this section of the text. So obviously there's 20 texts that can be selected from in English and EAL, and Born a Crime is, well, in EAL anyway, it's in the top 5. The average mark overall is a 5.6. So between that 5 and 6 range. These were the strategies that the exam report noted came from enhanced or high-level responses. And the first one was about topic interpretation and having contentions and arguments which allowed for exploration of the topic and the implications of the topic. Argument construction is also really valuable. So consider the order of your arguments, making connections between them, and I guess to the second last point there, resolving the topic at the very end. So building your arguments up so you actually answer the question at the very end. You obviously want to use a range of evidence. We're not just looking for quotations, but in this case, in Born a Crime, we're looking for literary features, stylistic and structural features as well. And the last point, which is the same for every single essay, you want clear and precise written expression. Just to break down the exam criteria, we've just got sort of 4 to 10 here. With the 0 to 3 essays, well, a 0 is when you write nothing, and if you get a 1 out of 10, it means you've written something relatively basic, maybe even a couple of sentences that respond to the topic. But words like basic and limited come up with essays 0 to 3. This is a bit of a change from, I guess, the last study design, but the big jump is from a 5 and a 6. And you'll notice in the 6 out of 10, that you need to show some elements of its ideas, concerns and values and some awareness of the structure and language used in the text. So if you want to get more than a 6 out of 10, so if you want to get above the average, you really do need to mention the literary features. And obviously, when we move up to that 8 and 9 to 10 out of 10, we're looking for high level, perceptive, close reading of the text with lots of complex and sophisticated vocabulary as well. But those are that's the exam criteria. And the main thing, I guess, particularly with the exam is you need to respond to the topic, you need to have really strong textual knowledge, and you need to have really clear and efficient writing. And those are the 3 areas that you really need to focus on. Are you responding to the topic? Are you showcasing a really good detailed knowledge of the text with varied examples and varied evidence? And is your writing clear and well structured? Those are the 3, I guess, key pillars that your essay should try and manage and balance. One of the main points that comes up in the exam is, are students exploring the implications of the text? So rather than simply repeating the key terms in the essay question, are you actually unpacking the question, answering the key point of the essay and analysing it? If it's an essay topic on, say, apartheid, you're not just writing about 3 points to do with apartheid. There are 3 points about apartheid that relate to the actual question itself. So please remember, we read so many essays on the exam where students take one of the key terms or key words and just write or memorize something they've done on that particular theme or idea, when really they're not answering the question. It is so important that you actually answer the question. In terms of structure, your essay should have a clear contention. You should also have, generally speaking, 3 arguments. You definitely can have 4. There's no rules about this, but each argument allows you to bring in evidence from the text and analyze this in relation to your contention, which should be consistent throughout. And the arguments should build off and feed off one another until you get to the very end. With the overall structure, generally speaking, you want an intro, 3 main bodies and a conclusion. We do the teal main body paragraphs, but really it's TAAL. So it's a topic sentence and a linking sentence. They're pretty important. And in the middle, as long as you're really analysing, bringing in analysis of the text and then answering the question. Those are my two A's, so analysis and answering the question. Those are the two main things. There's no specific order in which you do it in, but I really like to have two examples in between my topic sentence and my linking sentence. And I like to make sure I'm always linking those examples back to the key ideas and to the essay question. You really do want to try and take the assessor on a journey, so consider the order of your arguments and make connections between your ideas and claims. Some students like to say, do they agree, and disagree at the very end, or vice versa. It's completely fine. You can even argue both ways within a particular paragraph as well if you want to. We've seen that a little bit in the last few years. The other thing, obviously, that you can do with your arguments as well is just work through them chronologically throughout the text. So what's initially being done, what happens in the middle. Obviously, Born a Crime being a three-part text, it allows itself to sort of do that. And then your last main body paragraph, it might be about the ending of the text. That's another way that you can think about it as well. But there is no right way to write an essay. So start with basic structures, use your classroom resources, get teacher feedback to guide you. And once you become comfortable with a structure, you can then start taking risks and experimenting. But the key thing is to always take ownership of your essay. So you're the one in control of what you're writing and the arguments and evidence that you're using. Let's look at this sample topic. We picked the one we did in class the other day, which is Born a Crime is a story of overcoming limitations. Do you agree? This is from the 2023 VCAR exam. We always want to start with the keywords in the topic and thinking about what the key ideas are and what are some synonyms and antonyms. So the key phrase here is overcoming limitations. Now, something that's interesting to note is some students will look at this question and go, oh my goodness, there's no key theme or no key idea that I've looked at. And that's where I'd say your reading time is really, really valuable there to focus, to clear your mind and think about, okay, what are some synonyms I can think of? So when we're thinking about overcoming something, we're thinking about defeating it, rising above it, maybe disabling something, prevailing over something, or rising above it. Limitations are things that stop us. So what are some restrictions, boundaries, rules, and constraints? And hopefully when you start thinking about restrictions, you start thinking about, well, some of the key themes and ideas from the text. So when we're brainstorming, these are some of the implications. So I guess, what does the essay want us to talk about? Well, it wants us to talk about sort of characters that overcome barriers and what kind of barriers they might be. So I thought of things like apartheid law, about poverty, about racism, about domestic violence or violence in general, and about social expectations as well. I also want to think about the types of limitations. So I don't just want to talk about, say, apartheid. So think about things like the legal or the justice system. You can think about economic limitations like poverty, social problems, personal problems as well. Could be something such as family struggles. I mean, really, the essay could explore how Noah challenges or adapts to these obstacles as well, such as, for example, issues with his family. I definitely want to talk about defiance when it comes to overcoming barriers. So that sort of came up, and also sort of defiance versus adaptation. So while Trevor overcomes many barriers, he does it in different ways. Through either it's defiance, sometimes it's through, adapting, being a chameleon, say, for example. But when it comes to overcoming barriers, that last point, I want to look at that alternative perspective. So a strong essay could argue that while some characters like Trevor and Patricia overcome many obstacles, some of the limitations sort of remain beyond their control. So we could look at systemic inequality or domestic abuse even when it comes to Patricia. I always think there are two ways to plan an essay, and the general rule is you get the topic, you brainstorm, you formulate your contention, you've got your 3 or 4 main arguments, and then you think about your evidence. But what I sort of say to that is, well, you can have 3 or 4 really great arguments, but if you don't have the evidence to support it, then it's not going to be a strong essay. So sometimes what's really valuable to do is, well, think about your evidence. What quotations, what context details, what literary features do you know really well? And then can you arrange them into 3 separate arguments, which then builds towards a particular contention? The other thing obviously to do is to think about, okay, what do I know in agreement with the text or with the question, and what do I know that disagrees with the question as well? And once again, trying to work out arguments or ideas that you can then formulate into some sort of structure for your response. So there are always a number of ways in which you can approach an essay topic, and the start of the year is always a great way to work out, okay, what's going to work best for you. Please remember, you do have reading time, both in your SAC and in your exam as well. And that's really valuable. And building that skill of being able to plan an essay in your mind without writing it down is something that you can definitely work on. I think practicing reading time is a skill that not enough students use. It's so valuable. And then if you manage to master reading time, it actually places you above a lot of the other students across the state. So when it comes to formulating a contention or answering the question, these are some examples that you might like for this one. Once again, there's absolutely no answer key. So the examiners aren't looking at every single question with an answer key and saying this must be the contention and this must be the arguments. These are 4 contentions you might have for this particular question. First one's straightforward. Born a Crime is ultimately a story of overcoming limitations. The second one is while Born a Crime explores overcoming limitations, it ultimately reveals that resilience alone is not enough to escape systemic oppression. The third one, while Noah overcomes many limitations, systemic barriers remain inescapable for many, and Born a Crime reveals that some limitations cannot be fully overcome. I mean, the first one is pretty much agreeing with the topic. The others are sort of, I guess, questioning the topic, and I always suggest that that's probably a good thing to always do. Your arguments are obviously your reasons which support your contention. So consider adding the word because on the end of your contention if you're struggling to find arguments. Again, there's many different ways you could sort of approach this, particularly with arguments. You could focus on different limitations. You could focus on different assets or, attributes that allow individuals to overcome limitations. So it could be humor, it could be resilience, it could be defiance, it could be strength. There's no one way to answer a question. And I always think sometimes students will come to me and say, oh, I can't stand English. There's no answers. It's really frustrating. And what I'd say to that is if you can change your mindset and go, oh, there's no answers. Like, how good's that? You actually have complete control. The caveat being, as long as you answer the specific question, but you have control in how you want to approach this question. And again, work to your strength. So really think about what you know really well about this text, whether it's evidence, whether it's ideas, values, themes, concerns. Work to your strengths when it comes to planning for your essay. So with this contention, while Noah overcomes many limitations, systemic barriers remain inescapable for many. These are some sort of arguments you might think about. So maybe violence and trauma can be very difficult to overcome. Racial classification might be something that's difficult to overcome because it's so ingrained within society. The cycle of poverty, loss of identity, and maybe education and language could be an idea or a theme that you might take and say, well, this is what it takes to overcome limitations, but not everyone can access it. Obviously, Trevor can and Patricia can, but some of the other characters, particularly the secondary characters, or even more broadly, members of the black and coloured communities in South Africa can't access these. They are withheld from them by governments. So when it comes to planning, you obviously want to plan the evidence. You really want to avoid reusing examples or quotations or literary devices. You want to showcase a more broad and detailed knowledge of the text. Obviously, Trevor and Patricia are the two significant characters in the text, so you might find you're repeating examples from them. But you do want to touch on maybe a secondary character or two throughout your essay. Obviously, it's really important, especially initially in your early essays, that you're consulting things like your quotation banks, your class resources, your study guides and notes, and all those supports. And once you start to become comfortable and you start memorizing, you can start to take those away gradually. Let's start with introduction, possibly the most important paragraph of your essay, a little bit like breakfast. It's important because it's the first chance your examiner gets to, gain some ideas about what you're writing on and how well you write. The main things you want to do, obviously, are introduce the text, to state your contention or your answers to the topic, and to outline your arguments, your ideas, or your reasons in a logical order. And it's really important that you have clear, concise written expression with good vocab. This is a little template that I use. I like to start with some context in my first sentence, followed by my contention, and then outlining my arguments. Sometimes I'll do that one sentence each. I might even end my final sentence with some sort of authorial intent statement about the topic. There is no right way to go about this. Some students like to start with their contention first and then outline their arguments and bring in the context throughout. It's really up to you. I actually like to sort of write my first sentence or build some sort of, I guess, pro forma for my first sentence. So memorize that, make sure it's quite adaptable. More often than not, it'll be something similar to that that second sentence there. Initially set against the backdrop of racial division and classification in apartheid South Africa, Trevor Noah's memoir, Born a Crime, explores, and then I'll bring in some more context information that's relevant to the specific topic. So whether it's about gender, whether it's about overcoming limitations, whether it's about hardships like I was last year, something to do with that. And that way, I know when they say your writing time starts now, I've got a sentence that's ready to go that I can use, and my confidence will build from there. This is example 1, which is a mid-range topic. Set against the backdrop of racial segregation and division in South Africa, Trevor Noah's memoir, Born a Crime, exposes the flaws of the apartheid system. Within this, there are many challenges individuals and groups must overcome in order to survive and succeed. The illogical racial classification and endless cycle of poverty are two crucial factors which inhibit marginalised groups in achieving their full potential. However, Noah ultimately champions individuals who are able to overcome these obstacles through resilience and humour. It's a pretty straightforward, direct introduction. I quite like it. I think it's pretty clear in terms of what ideas they're going to be writing on. They're going to talk about racial classification, they're going to talk about poverty, and they're going to talk about resilience and humour in overcoming those, I guess, challenges at the very end in their last main body paragraph. The vocab's pretty good, and something I would say is they don't waffle at all. They're really concise with their language. They're not wasting their words, which is really important. You don't want to write a really long paragraph just for the sake of it being a really long paragraph, especially your main bodies. A lot of students end up writing so much plot summary. Yes, you've got longer paragraphs, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's better writing. Example 2 is of a high range. Set against the backdrop of apartheid era South Africa, Trevor Noah's memoir, Born a Crime, offers a powerful critique of a system built on racial segregation and inequality. Within this deeply flawed society, individuals and communities face immense obstacles that threaten their ability to survive and succeed. The arbitrary racial classifications and the relentless cycle of poverty serve as key barriers that prevent marginalised groups from reaching their full potential, trapping them in systemic oppression. However, Noah ultimately celebrates those who defy these limitations, demonstrating that their resilience, adaptability, and humour can serve as powerful tools for overcoming adversity. Through his own journey and experiences of those around him, Noah reveals that while society imposes restrictions, individuals have the capacity to challenge and transcend them. It's actually pretty similar to the first introduction. There's a little bit more detail there. Potentially vocab is a little bit more sophisticated as well and complex, but it generally does the same thing. It's outlining the 3 ideas or 3 arguments in a logical and straightforward way. When it comes to your main body paragraphs, the key is you've got to flesh out each argument. You really want to include a range of evidence to showcase a detailed knowledge of the text, and that means things like literary, structural, and stylistic features. Analyse and explain the evidence and how it strengthens your arguments. Consider authorial intent and context as well. And obviously, at all times, you want to remain on topic. And this is where I'd say to students, try and find the synonyms for the keywords in the essay topic. That's going to be really crucial just to remind the examiners that you are responding to the topic. If you are really stuck and you find that you're someone that always just repeats the topic words, look, that's fine. At least you're answering the topic. That's what I'd say. But you do probably want to find some synonyms, or in fact antonyms, so words that have the opposite meaning. So a good one for that is, rather than just talking about justice, you might talk about injustice. That might be a way into the text as well that doesn't lead to you repeating your analysis. This is the teal structure that we go with here, but as I said to you before, I've highlighted the topic sentence and the linking sentence because what goes between them is really up to you. I like an expanding sentence because I kind of use that to bring in some context detail. So whatever the idea is, I like to bring in my context detail there. Like evidence and explain, You can have, 2 examples and your explanation at the end. I like outlining my examples and then analysing it, but really it's up to you what you want to do in the middle of your paragraphs, as long as your topic sentence has a really clear idea that's relevant to the topic, that your linking sentence returns to the essay topic, and it's consistent throughout. That's the main thing. What goes in the middle, as long as you're analysing the text and answering the question, is going to be okay. With the topic sentence, you want to directly engage with the essay topic's language, which is why I say either use the key terms in there or a synonym. So in this case, you probably want to be mentioning something to do with limitations or restrictions or boundaries. You want to outline your specific focus area, your idea, your claim, whatever your idea is, you want to outline that and introduce it through a verb. And then you want to link to the text somehow. So whether it's Noah's name, whether you say the memoir, or raise a societal norm or context detail, that's important. I've got some sentence starters there. The memoir explores, Noah exposes, Born a Crime examines. Those are 3 sentences I've got, or sentence starters I've got in the back of my mind. I'm ready to go in case I'm not too sure what I want to write on. And just Jim's tip there, that high range responses look to connect arguments together when appropriate. So that phrase there, while initially the idea from the previous topic, Noah ultimately suggests and you outline your new idea. That might be something for, say, a third main body paragraph when you're arguing against what you've just sort of spoken about. These are 3, I guess, levels of topic sentence. The first one is quite simplistic, and then we get a bit more complex throughout. So Noah explores poverty as a challenge individuals must overcome. That's a really clear topic sentence. I know that you're talking about poverty and it being a limitation. Fantastic. That's really good. Noah examines the cyclical nature of poverty as an enduring obstacle that individuals must navigate and resist. Again, just a little bit more detail, an adjective in there. So the cyclical nature of poverty as an enduring obstacle. So talking about the fact that it's long lasting. And the last one is perhaps referencing the previous paragraph. So alongside systemic racism, Noah exposes the cyclical nature of poverty as actively preventing Black and coloured South Africans from realising their aspirations. And these are some topic sentence verbs. I like explores, examines, and presents. They're relatively broad verbs, especially if you're going to do the thing where you argue both ways in a particular paragraph. There's other verbs you can use, posits or extols or exposes. And also, if you're arguing a specific way, you might use one of the authorial intent verbs as well, which will come up a little bit later on. But these are my go-to verbs for my topic sentences, generally speaking. With your expanding sentence, obviously, use this to expand on your topic sentence or to connect your idea or claim to your evidence. But for me, it's a great opportunity to provide some context detail. So link your idea to the time period or to the setting. And if you're stuck, just think about how apartheid influences your idea or claim or your chosen example, because every single character's actions, motivations, thoughts, ideas, environment, it's all influenced by apartheid thinking and views. With the evidence, there's lots that you can use. Obviously, quotations are really important. And obviously, short, sharp quotations as well work really well. One thing I would say is you want to embed them. A quotation shouldn't be a sentence on its own. It should be embedded within a sentence. And that's why I say the shorter the quotations, often the better. Avoid, one-word quotations like apartheid, for example. Some one-word quotations work really well. But they've got to have meaning. You need to analyze them. Literary features and stylistic features are also important to analyze, so use meta-language where possible. So things like imagery, similes, metaphors. Informal tone or conversational tone, that's used a little bit as well. It can also be structural features too, so it could be the flashback or the non-linear structure. Just in general, any word choices that are used by Trevor Noah are really important. And those are some verbs that you can use. So, Noah utilizes or employs or implements or applies or uses. They can work really, really well. And obviously symbols and context details can also be used as evidence. And the main symbols we sort of see in writing around Born a Crime are driveways and the CD writer as well that gets given to him. The second-hand car, the Volkswagen, is another symbol, but it doesn't sort of end there. Again, there's a range of evidence that you can use, not just quotations. And obviously you want to explain and analyze why Noah uses these. Think about every word as being deliberate. Noah has deliberately written every single word in this text. and each word really can be analysed. You want to avoid broad examples and use specific moments. So a phrase like throughout the text, Noah, overcomes difficulties like racial segregation. We'll give a specific example. The first one here is one that's quite broad. The presence of humour throughout the memoir shows why it's important during difficult times. This is where I'd say pick a specific moment. Whether it's being thrown out of the car in chapter 1 or whether it's being in the hospital in the last chapter in my mother's life. Mention a specific example and go with that. The second one is a little bit better. So Noah likens Trevor to a creature of prey living like a mouse in that house, constantly fearing the moment when the dragon would emerge, a metaphor that reflects the terror and unpredictability of his stepfather's violence. Through this imagery, Noah not only conveys his personal fear, but also draws a parallel to the dehumanisation of black South Africans under apartheid, highlighting how systemic oppression conditioned individuals to view those in power as unrelenting. When it comes to literary features, you want to provide context to the scene, and more often than not, I'll bring in my example and my quotation or quotations, and then after that, I'll bring in my literary feature. Be explicit in using meta-language to showcase your understanding. So mention whether it's a simile, it's a vignette or anecdote, whether it's the narrative perspective you're analysing, and always explain why it is used. Each word choice, each sentence, and each anecdote is purposeful. And there's some sentence starters there that you might find really useful. And once you build those up and start being really familiar with those, you can then start playing around with it. And you'll see that the second one particularly lends itself to more so authorial intent. With your explanations, you always want to explain or analyse any evidence provided in relation to your paragraph topic or the essay prompt. What does your evidence suggest about your idea, and how does it strengthen your contention? Use verbs to ensure you're always explaining it, and we'll get to the verb list in a moment. And consider using Noah's name and exploring his authorial intent. You also want to avoid repeating your analysis. So if you find with two examples you're repeating your analysis, either merge them together or pick a different example. That's going to be really, really important. If you are going to, repeat your analysis, I always think of the verb reinforcing works really, really well because your example is reinforcing a previous point. These are your explanation verbs here as well. I always think you want to word up shows. There's a lot of different ways that you can say it. Not all these words are interchangeable. The verb elucidates is very controversial. It does have a specific meaning. It means to bring something to light, like elucidate, bring something to light, so something that wasn't clear that is clear now. But again, my go-to ones often are things like highlights and illustrates. So I find those really useful. And when something is being emphasized or underscored, those are the things I like to go with, particularly with literary features. They'll often emphasize something, or maybe even reflect or mirror something as well. I find those ones to be really useful. But again, start playing around with these verbs. One that's not on there actually is perpetuates. That's actually one of my favorite ones, is perpetuate. So probably should add that to my list. Authorial intent is really important. When it comes to Born a Crime, think about what Noah is trying to do through his examples. Is he trying to highlight the importance of something or to reflect on societal values? Is he trying to criticize a behavior or mindset or ridicule certain actions? Does he want to warn the audience against something or to discourage people from doing something? Or are there certain political messages or controversial opinions he wants to convey? These are 5 verbs, both of the positive messages he's trying to send and the negative messages he's trying to send. Again, it's not a complete list, but these are one of the 10 most common authorial intent verbs that I end up using. And more often than not, I'll use one particularly as my second last sentence in a paragraph, because I find that's really a really useful way of connecting my evidence and my linking sentence together. I've just written down here 7 statements that I guess are negative messages that Trevor Noah is trying to send. So the first one, that Noah critiques the absurdity and hypocrisy of apartheid, exposing its arbitrary and oppressive nature. Noah condemns the systemic racism and segregation that helped shape South African society, highlighting its long-lasting effects on societies and individuals. Noah exposes the complexities of identity and belonging, showing how race, language, and class influenced his upbringing. He challenges traditional gender roles, presenting strong female figures who defy societal expectations, and that one is particularly important when it comes to Patricia, who is the real hero of the text. He exposes the economic struggles of marginalised communities. He denounces police brutality and corruption, particularly in, I guess, the paragraphs around Teddy and also Abel, and he challenges misconceptions about South Africa. And I like the idea and the quote around Nelson Mandela for this, but he does provide a personal perspective on South African life. That's not where it ends. He critiques the illusion of progress in post-apartheid South Africa. I guess he denounces the lack of social mobility as well. He condemns domestic violence and the patriarchal structures that enable abuse, and that links in, I guess, with the justice system. I guess he exposes the psychological impact as well of apartheid, and he shows how deeply ingrained these systems were in everyday life through the anecdotes and vignettes that he brings up. There are also some positive messages that come from this text as well, and the first one is really important. He celebrates the resilience and determination of individuals who resist oppression, Patricia particularly there. He endorses education and language as powerful tools for breaking cycles of poverty and oppression. He champions defiance against injustice. He celebrates the power of storytelling. He champions the idea of that adaptability and resourcefulness are key to survival, especially in oppressive environments. And I actually haven't written down here, but obviously he celebrates humour as a survival mechanism as well, and shows how comedy can be a tool for resilience and also resistance, I guess. And he brings up this idea about, mocking the system. That's actually a quote that you can use. Your linking sentence is pretty straightforward. You just got to connect your paragraph topic to the essay topic. It should be pretty similar to your topic sentence, but obviously consider some synonyms or changing your sentence structures for that one as well. But the key thing is RTFQ, ATFQ. Read the question, answer the question. If you're not too sure what the F stands for, just think about it for a moment. Memorize that. That's what you have to do. You read the question, you answer the question. Always, always, always have the question in the back of your mind. And your linking sentence is a perfect way just to remind your examiner that you are responding to this specific topic. If you're starting out with essay writing, I find these basic sentences work really well. Again, these are really simplistic sentence structures and starters. So if you're aiming for an 8 to 10 out of 10, these probably aren't going to work for you. But if you're aiming for that 5 or 6 out of 10, this is a great way for you to build in some structure and I guess have a bit of a safety net when it comes to writing main body paragraphs. Again, we want 2 examples ideally. If you're just starting out, stick with 1. But ultimately, if you want to push above the average, if you want to get to that 6 to 7 out of 10, you'll want to be looking at 2 examples or piece of evidence per main body paragraph. This is a mid-range example. This is example 1. Noah highlights how violence and injustice are deeply embedded in South African society, making them difficult to escape. So the topic sentence has done the right thing there. They've got their idea, which is violence and injustice. That's one of the limitations, and that it's difficult to escape. He critiques the so-called bloodless revolution, exposing its irony by stating black blood ran in the streets. This visceral imagery challenges the idea of a peaceful transition from apartheid, revealing that black South Africans bore the brunt of the violence. Additionally, the justice system fails to protect the vulnerable. As seen in Abel's sentencing, he pled guilty to attempted murder, yet didn't serve a single day in prison. Through this blatant injustice, Noah condemns how institutions meant to uphold justice instead enable cycles of violence. Therefore, Noah exposes how systemic oppression persists, making true freedom difficult to achieve. Again, I would say it's probably a relatively short paragraph. I think the vocab is pretty good. Have they mentioned literary feature? Oh, they mentioned irony. So they mentioned irony there. They maybe could have explained it. Oh, they've got imagery too. So they've got some literary features there. So that suggests to me that maybe they could be pushing for a 6. It's quite short. The vocab is pretty good. They're pretty clear again. They're not wasting their words. If you extended this by say 2 or 3 sentences just on say plot retell or summary, it wouldn't improve its mark at all. They've got a consistent idea, but they've done a pretty good job. This is a pretty good mid-range effort here. Again, though, we'd want a little bit more detail here. Again, particularly when we're talking about the justice system, I think there's other examples that you can use, particularly around language. We know, of course, that Patricia goes to the police a couple of times before she gets shot, and there's some great quotations you could use for that. You can also use the example of Teddy and the, I guess, absurdity in the position that Trevor finds himself in there. There's some explicit language in there as well. They were they were completely effed up by their own construct of race, that they couldn't see that the white boy was in front of them. So again, maybe thinking about using another example and analysing it in a little bit more detail will help with that. This is a high range response. It's only part of the paragraph, I believe. I've tried to use similar evidence to the previous one. I won't read it all out now. You can pause it here if you want to read through it, but hopefully you'll find it's a little bit more complex in its analysis, and it's pushing more so towards an 8 out of 10 rather than being in that 5 or 6 range. The basic approach to a conclusion is always just to restate your contention and outline your arguments, and to avoid bringing any new information. But if you really want to take it to the next level, you want to resolve your topic, and you want to sort of finish with your strongest argument or piece of analysis. You generally want to finish off by answering the question and, I guess, tying up the essay in a nice bow, essentially, but you want to end it right there at the very end. This is a high-range conclusion. Ultimately, Born a Crime presents an examination of apartheid's enduring impact, revealing both the resilience and the systemic barriers that prevented many from escaping oppression. While Noah's success highlights the power of adaptability, education and defiance, his memoir also acknowledges that for many, the weight of institutional racism and poverty made overcoming such limitations nearly impossible. Through his reflection, Noah critiques a system that sought to suppress, while simultaneously celebrating those who dared to challenge it. And that's a nice little conclusion. Something I've noticed in a couple of these examples, though, is they haven't underlined the text title or popped it in single quotation marks. That's definitely something you should be doing in your essays. When it comes to formal writing, generally you want to avoid third person. I've seen plenty of really good essays that do use first person, like us or we, but generally speaking, I like to avoid it. I like to separate myself from the audience. You want to avoid judgments. You're analysing, not evaluating the text. So you avoid saying that Trevor Noah does something really well. You want to use your active voice, not your passive voice as well. Avoid slang terms, avoid using cliches or contractions. Contractions being like don't write can't or won't or shouldn't. We use that for speaking to minimise speaking time. Should not, could not, would not. It also will add an extra word to your word count as well. I like using connectives as well. So between examples, I like to use additionally and furthermore to link between my examples and my explanation. I like phrases like here or thus or as a result or in doing so. Same with my linking sentences. I like these little connectives as well. Again, it's just a really nice, obvious way, explicit way to show that you're moving from one point to the next. Again, not all essays use it. There's no rules here, but these are things that I think work really, really well, particularly, as I said, if you're aiming towards that 5, 6, 7 out of 10 essay. You really want to be concise with your writing as well. So these phrases come up a little bit, and I want you trying to avoid them, the first 3 particularly. So the first one, an example of the scene is when. Just go straight to when. The author uses many literary features to show this. This comes up a lot, especially with films. You know, the director uses lots of film techniques to show this. Pinpoint 1 or 2 and explain them in detail. There are many examples that showcase the consequences of apartheid. One of those is, once again, just go straight to the point of when. This last one, this highlights. So that phrase is fine. It's absolutely fine to say this highlights, but it comes up a little bit, you know, they'll give out their example and say this shows or this highlights or this demonstrates. Tell me or define what this is. So this could be Trevor's experiences. So Trevor's experiences highlight, or Patricia's determination highlights, or this similarly highlights. Or, by comparing the Soweto citizens to monkeys, Noah highlights. So trying to find what this is. In that first example, they did it quite nicely, but avoid it. I think the word "this" is used a lot. Tell me what this is. Be really specific there. It's a small thing that you can do, and again, it kind of, to me, suggests that you're going from that 5 to 6 out of 10 to a 7 out of 10 writing by adding that little bit more complexity, or just being a lot clearer in terms of your writing. These are some banned terms. Definitely don't use I or my. Us and we is controversial. I avoid using it though. Don't use the word essay. So in my essay, I will write avoid that. Avoid the word theme. So a consistent theme throughout the text is apartheid. We want to avoid that. We want to avoid being explicit. Trevor Noah is not writing Born a Crime going, the themes I'm going to write about are these things. He's absolutely not. Themes and ideas are things that we talk about as teachers as a way to break up the text. The word thing is way too simplistic. We want to be more specific with that. Is the thing an aspect? Is it a trait? Is it an action? What is a thing? Again, wording up good and bad. Is it positive, optimistic? Is it negative? Is it damaging? Again, we want to word up those terms. Avoid a word like contention. So my contention is, as an example. Avoid the word quote or quotes. We want to avoid our contractions. And the last one is the verb questions. It's a great verb. Noah questions or challenges is really good. I think we want to avoid asking questions though. Essays are all about answering questions, so we shouldn't be asking them. Some final tips. Continuously, and I mean continuously, draft and edit your work. Seek feedback from your teachers and tutors. I would definitely suggest though, before you hand in any work, be it a paragraph, be it a planner, be it a full essay, before you hand it in for feedback, read it yourself. Give yourself some feedback. Have a think about those key aspects. Have you got enough examples? Is your summary and analysis balanced, or are you over summarizing? Try and self-edit and self-reflect on your work as well. Consider using synonyms and reworking sentence structures to ensure you don't sound too repetitive. Now is the time to start taking risks. Definitely build an idea and quote bank and look for unique examples. Again, we do find often when it comes to marking essays, we find students using the same examples, and sometimes the really common examples do work really well and you can use them. But every now and again, in at least one of your paragraphs, you should be thinking about a unique example that no one else has. It's just a way to showcase to the examiner that maybe you're looking a little bit more closely, or you have, I guess, a more unique perspective on the text. And the last one is to look at a range of different topics to get a gauge on which ideas and evidence are flexible. So if you find a certain example works really well across multiple topics, great, it's worth memorizing. But also it's a great way to challenge yourself and work out, all right, what gaps do I have? Is there a certain idea or theme that I'm struggling with? Something we discussed last week came around humour. We were really struggling with this idea about humour and writing about humour. Now, we want to be able to workshop it enough that we've got at least one idea or a couple of examples through with humour that we can bring into our essay. But we certainly came to the realisation that it would be really hard just to write about humour. We need to think about other aspects. So that's a basic run through of essay writing. There's going to be more episodes of 6P's podcast, particularly on Born a Crime over the coming weeks. So make sure you like and subscribe 6P's podcast, and we'll see you next time.